Sugar Bowl. Sugar Bowl. Notre Dame goes down, or Notre Dame rather beats Georgia 23-10 in the Sugar Bowl. And it's got college football talking because this was another result that vindicated this narrative that has been rightfully pushed for a long time now, that the SEC this year is not head and shoulders ahead of the rest of college football. And frankly, wasn't really the case last year either. And now one of college football's most important voices is saying exactly what this channel, myself, and many others have been saying for a while now about the SEC not being special. And look, it was funny going back and forth with some SEC fans, not Georgia fans, mind you, but SEC fans. It was a Missouri fan in particular that was going back and forth with me about the result of the Sugar Bowl, which tells you all you need to know, right? That's the whole SEC thing. Like Georgia and Alabama carry everybody else. They ride on the coattails and want to chant SEC, SEC. And that's what I got, which was basically this excuse of like, well, you know, it was a 3-point game. And then within 13 seconds, it turns into 14 points because of a turnover and a kickoff return for Notre Dame. And they really didn't control the game. And, you know, how can you say that this blah, 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 blah? To me, it was like, okay, wow, well, we've reached a new iteration here of what the SEC propaganda machine is going to punch out, where, you know, for a while it was, well, they could have won, but they didn't want to be here in the bowl game thing. And then it was, you know, the hypothetical matchups, and the SEC's undefeated in hypothetical games. And now it's like, well, you know, the score doesn't really matter. The score doesn't matter in a game that doesn't tell the whole story. You know, I mean, it's like Georgia's offense didn't do anything. Georgia's offense was not doing anything. Last I checked, special teams points count. Last I checked, that's how Notre Dame plays, is by utilizing great defense, a gritty quarterback with good legs, not all that much of a passing game, and they can utilize the third phase of the game, special teams as well. That's the way that Notre Dame has been winning all year. They've done it very successfully. And I'm not sure that people have like watched a ton of Notre Dame to see that, because people probably checked out when they lost to Northern Illinois early in the year. Some of this is a part of a college football problem where everybody like watches the games in their conference and is not watching every single game, which is hard to do. Like, I get it. But, you know, I think that's more of a take that comes from like not watching Notre Dame. Well, you know, that was fluky. No, that was Notre Dame. That's what they do. That's how they win games. That's their recipe and their formula. And Georgia just never really seriously threatened. They were always a drive away from being a drive away for the entire second half of the game. I'll put it this way. You know, I mean, huge stink was made about how Arizona State and Boise did not deserve buys because they were double-digit underdogs, and they were 12 and 13-point underdogs. That is a travesty. How could we have a 13-point underdog getting a bye, and that's terrible, and, you know. Well, Georgia lost the game by 13. That was apparently an outrageous amount for a team to be a dog by, and that meant that we needed to lose our minds about what we're doing with the playoff format. So if Georgia's out there losing by that much, that must also be worthy of quite a public outcry, right? That probably was not playing a very close game. I'm just using the same logic we heard from that side all back against them. Here's the tail of the tape on the SEC this postseason. They are 1-2 in the playoff. They have 2 double-digit losses by a combined 38 points. Those losses came to the Big Ten and to Notre Dame. And this is the other point I will emphasize for Notre Dame. Like how the goalposts have really moved here on the expectations for Georgia once the back-to-back national champs. Notre Dame had not won a game of this magnitude since 1994. I was 5 years old. 5 years old, the last time Notre Dame won a game of this magnitude, which was the Cotton Bowl. Okay? This is not something Notre Dame does. This is not a game that they win. This represents a really big change in college football that they won this game. AKA, that's not like Georgia going out there and losing to Ohio State. Notre Dame, all due respect to them as a program, not on that level. And then, by the way, Texas, the other participant in the playoff for the SEC, went to double overtime with the team that was picked dead last in the Big 12 preseason poll. Say what you will about final results, but everybody who looked around this league that the SEC would tell you is not talented said Arizona State is the least talented. They're the worst team in this non-talented league. They just pushed Texas to double overtime. Alabama loses to a completely depleted Michigan team in the ReliaQuest Bowl. Say that sentence out loud. How does that fit for Alabama? Even Paul Finebaum backed off and said, yeah, my bad. Shouldn't have been pushing Bama for the playoff. They rushed for a whopping 68 yards. That SEC physicality rushed for 68 yards against Michigan. South Carolina lost to Illinois in the Citrus Bowl, another team that was supposed to be a playoff caliber team. And oh, by the way, Oklahoma, which was a part of that Alabama resume, they just lost to Navy in the Armed Forces Bowl, and they finished 6-7. It's pretty obvious where this is going. Like there is all of the data from this year. If you are going to rely on data from this year and not rely on your feelings, your narratives from the last 15, all of the data suggests that the SEC is not anywhere near head and shoulders above the rest of college football and certainly did not deserve any level of special treatment. They're just right in line. They're another conference. The Big Ten, based on what they have left still in the playoff and how Ohio State is playing, I mean, it looks like they may have had more at the top. The SEC, perhaps deeper, perhaps less crap at the bottom, but we've got a real compelling argument here that the SEC was just very much in line with most of the other conferences in the rest of college football. And Joel Klatt summed this up very well. Joel Klatt, Fox Sports, you see him every single week on one of the biggest games in college football. Klatt said, the narrative that the SEC is so clearly head and shoulders above everybody all the time is dead, and it needs to die based on the evidence in front of our eyes. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't have the most guys drafted. It doesn't mean that they're not a great conference. They are a great conference, and they're probably the deepest conference this year. However, this idea of a vast superiority needs to die based on the evidence, not narrative. As we move forward, hopefully that's the case. And he's exactly right. He's exactly right. If you are abiding by the evidence, I know we don't agree on a lot of facts or anything these days in this country, but we have all watched the games. We've seen the games. We've seen how it's been played out. If you are watching the games and you understand what the results have been this year, there is no justification for the SEC being out in front of everybody else or deserving special treatment. And the problem is when SEC fans will hear you say that, it turns into, well, the SEC is still the best conference. You're an idiot if you don't think the SEC is the best conference. Well, we can have that discussion. I'm not saying the SEC is bad. I'm saying the SEC does not deserve the special treatment of getting a fourth team, for instance, into the playoff, and that perhaps even considering Alabama, South Carolina, and Ole Miss the way that we did was evidence of too much special treatment for the league already. That's what I'm saying. I'm not mocking the SEC and saying that the SEC is terrible. I'm simply saying the SEC is not your older brother's SEC from 5 years ago. It's a different era. Okay. And it's look, last year, this is not even just a this year thing. We have a 2-year trend, and this goes back to the changes in college football and how it indicates that, this could be here to stay. Perhaps I'll have more on that in just a moment. But last year, it took Florida State getting absolutely screwed, being a 13-0 unbeaten Power 4 conference champ, left out of the playoff for Bama to even make it there and then lose. So back-to-back years, we have the SEC missing or just barely, rather, making it into the Final Four. Back-to-back years, just barely sneaking one team in, backdooring one team into the Final Four. This year it was Texas converting 4th and 13, getting away with a targeting call. Last year it was Alabama stealing a spot from a more deserving team in Florida State. I didn't necessarily say better there, okay? Don't mistake my words, but a more deserving Florida State team that really should have been in there. So, okay. I hope we're all okay with that, SEC fans. I am not saying that the SEC is a bad league, merely that it does not deserve special treatment. Joel Klatt is on board with that as well. And the reason that the chorus of voices that you hear, like myself, are so loud on this right now is because for once, the volume has been turned down on the other side. And for once, it's a chance to get the message out when there's not a giant megaphone blasting from the South that keeps that from happening, right? Because the problem is the SEC was so loud. Everybody, Finebaum, Kiffin, everybody was so loud. Peter Burns from ESPN shouting about how it's just different in the SEC. There should be multiple teams in the playoff. And it's been like this for 15 to 20 years at this point that everybody's had to deal with that. It's been like living in a house where like you're in a living room house party and the speaker is just blasting music so loud that you can't hear yourself think. And it's been going and going. And you're like, when is this going to be over? Well, somebody finally shut the stereo off, right? Bama sucks it up against Michigan, turns down the volume a little bit. Texas almost loses to Arizona State, cranks down that volume. Georgia gets drubbed by Notre Dame. Well, now it's off. The volume's off. And so this is the chance for everybody to speak up and say something and or just hear themselves think. So yeah, a little bit of like, hey man, this has been annoying. We're going to get our takes off here. We're going to get our points across here when there's room to actually breathe. There's such a huge push from everybody like Lane Kiffin, who still hasn't shut up about all this, by the way, right? Like Lane Kiffin was still pushing this whole idea, his tweets and still, let's go Georgia, let's go Texas, and then nothing after the fact. Let's go Tennessee. And we never get anything when the SEC team actually loses or does not perform well. But we did get, I would say, a good admission of sorts from Lane Kiffin about the Big 12. I will get to that in just a moment. Maybe admission is the wrong word, but seemed like actually a nod of somewhat respect toward the Big 12. But because things had been so loud, that's why you're getting a loud pushback now. I would also tell you, is it the third law, Newton's third law? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. I may be off on that, but that I think is really the truth here. When you yell as loud as SEC country has yelled for a long time, you're going to get that back on you when all of a sudden your narrative isn't adding up anymore and the math isn't mathing. Another way to say this would just be bleep around and find out. That's kind of the modern version of for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So like, I get it, man. I get why SEC fans have been as confident as they have been for a while. I do. They're used to being by far and away the best, and it has generally been earned. I'm not saying they haven't gotten some help from the SEC getting really, really deeply in bed with them when that TV contract started about 20 years ago, but it gave them a little extra push. They've exploited their resources very well, and they were definitely the kings of college football for a very long time. They also had the greatest coach of all time coaching in their league, just absolutely running it. And so that certainly helped. However, it's not the case anymore. And I know that's hard to let go. And I have seen, I will give some SEC fans credit, I have seen a little bit of contrition from some being like, all right, like Paul Finebaum, like, hey, maybe we were a little bit off here. And